Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be here today with my good friend, Professor Fulufelo Lechuera. He is the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Management Sciences at the Durban University of Technology, and he is also the head of the BRICS Research Center at the Durban University of Technology. He has been leading many projects, several projects related to the BRICS over the last years. That's why we have this now long time cooperation and deep cooperation. I always tell everyone, it's not by chance that we have here HSC and the Durban University of Technology as co-organizers, because those are two of the main important partners of this school, the School of Economics at Unicamp. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Professor Lechuera, and talking about a very important topic, which is the Bandung Conference, which some people say may be taken as a reference for the BRICS. Some say it's not the case, so we're going to now listen to the opinion of Professor Fulufelo Lechuera. Thank you very much. The floor is yours. You can have 30 to 40 minutes a presentation, and then we go to the discussions. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. Oh, just like that. Okay. As long as it. All right. Thank you very much, Bruno, for the introductions and for the partnership. And thanks to the colleagues who are here today to listen to the talk and to engage. As Bruno has rightfully indicated, the Bandung Conference of 1955 is generally seen as the reference point for the countries of the Global South, the global majority, and for the establishment of the non-aligned movements and everything else that followed. Now, there is always a reference to the Bandung Conference and non-aligned movement in reference to BRICS. Every time we talk about BRICS, because BRICS is generally perceived to be Global South, there is always that reference to Bandung. And what I will try and do is talk about Bandung and also talk slightly or shortly about BRICS and the synergies between the two, the continuity from Bandung Conference through the non-aligned movement to the BRICS, and whether or not the two formations were aimed at achieving the same goal, or whether the two have distinct roles during their era of existence. So if we were to go back and trace where the Bandung Conference emanated from, we will agree that after World War II, and immediately thereafter, with the Cold War, the countries of the Global South, majority of whom were still colonies, others were gaining their independence from colonialism, started thinking about their future and their role in global affairs. And few countries of Asia and Africa decided to stage the first meeting of the countries who are not aligned to chart a way forward, to talk about the future global world order. And indeed, it was India, it was Sri Lanka, it was also Indonesia who helped put together the Bandung Conference in Bandung in Indonesia. Now, we will equally also agree, and it's common knowledge, that immediately after World War II, in 1944 to be precise, the countries of the global north came together to think about how they can cooperate and collaborate into the future without destroying each other. And at the famous Bretton Woods Conference, they agreed to take major actions that include, but not limited to, managing military use, managing economic instruments, establishment specifically of the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, later World Bank and IMF, and of course the question around trading, using a singular instrument for trade, and it was agreed that the US dollar convertibility to the dollar, to the gold, will be the standard. And of course, you know, later on, 1971, Richard Nixon reversed that decision when the USA was in big trouble fighting with OPEC. And at the Bretton Woods negotiations, of course, the countries of the Global South were not included, specifically because many of them were still colonies. India, Indonesia, all countries of Africa and Latin America were not part of those engagements. Now, okay, sure. Now, 29 countries came together from Asia and from Africa. These were just but some of the leaders, Nehru, Nkrumah, and Gamal Nasser, and Tito was also there. And they had very interesting conversations. And in particular, the speech that was given by the president then of Indonesia was quite interesting in the way in which he used words to describe the importance of resorting to other forms of violence, peaceful violence, in order to address the challenges of the global majority. At Bandung, what was agreed was that it is indeed the countries that are former colonies that are fighting for independence against imperialism, and that they needed an alternative path, and not be forced to choose sides between the USA and USSR, either to be capitalist or communist. So those political ideologies really defined the era. You were either in the communist camp or you were in the capitalist camp. And that's how countries were aligned. And dependent on which camp you were aligned, you either could be dethroned or you could get considerable support to perpetuate power, even if it were not democratic. Okay. Now, I think what I find quite interesting is that during the very same era, or rather the gentleman called Richard Wright wrote quite compelling The Color Curtain, because his argument was that the moment of Bandung, that era, was an era of race. It was about the white skin versus the brown skin and the yellow skin. It was, the entire era was defined in racial terminology. And if you were brown-skinned and you were yellow-skinned, it implied you are the colonized. You are an asset of the imperial forces, and therefore you could not determine your own path. And when they did meet in Bandung, this became a very important conversation. How do we, who are brown and black, determine our own future without being pressured by imperial forces? I think the statement that I've highlighted here is quite a moving one about having calling on the moral violence of nations in favor of peace by President Sukarno of Indonesia. That was from the speech that he gave at the Bandung conference when he opened the conference. But there were quite interesting conversations that came afterwards. If you were to listen, for argument's sake, to Malcolm X, because he did make mention to or reference to Bandung in his speeches, and if you did go back to W.E.B. Du Bois, for argument's sake, you will see that he, even though he came much earlier than the Bandung conference, he did make mention to the question of race as a very important question that the global majority has got to address. And this was in reference to his book, The Souls of Black Folk, and not only in reference to black as we know it today, but to the black, yellow, and red. And this indeed is a very meaningful argument that he put forward in this book about our role and purpose in global affairs. Now, at Bandung, there were numerous undertakings that were taken by the leaders, and among those included, and if you go to BRICS and you look at BRICS currently, the purpose for BRICS and some of the major resolutions, including the purpose for the establishment of BRICS, you will see some element of resonance between the two. But what was concluded at Bandung included, but not limited to, the following: that there should be cultural cooperation, we talk about now in BRICS. There should be respect for human rights and equality among nations. There should equally be respect for sovereignty, self-determination in respect to the question of colonialism and independence thereafter, and that nations should instead resort to peaceful means of coexistence and resolving differences rather than through the barrel of the gun. So these were the undertakings that the leaders of the Third World, as it was called, made at the Bandung conference. There were, however, numerous failures that came immediately thereafter. And some of these failures were perpetuated by what you may deem to be infiltration by the CIA and by other political parties that were sponsored from the outside within numerous countries of the Third World. And I would really attribute the failure of the implementation of the Bandung Conference resolutions to perhaps three main factors. That the there was dissipation of the Bandung spirit immediately after some of the leaders who were instrumental at Bandung started fading away. So that spirit didn't carry over. But importantly, there was the question of vacillating position on the question of communism. Because communism did not, or the communist Russia at the time did not support extensively and vigorously the promotion of socialism or communism. And therefore, especially in Africa and Latin America, we saw numerous coups d'etat taking over, and numerous, including in Africa, and numerous leaders were dethroned. And there are numerous that could be linked to what had happened in Bandung up to the early 1970s, when the Cold War was at its height. In 1961, for argument's sake, when Patrice Lumumba was taken out in the DRC, there is direct link to the question of the carryover of the independence, total independence and non-alignment. When when President Holland here in Brazil was taken out around 1964, of course, because his position was ambiguous vis-a-vis the United States, and of course, President Sukarno in Indonesia was equally taken out. What I thought I would do is just to play you a small clip, and I hope it will work. So we were here talking about Bandung and its effect, its implication on global affairs, and specifically the influences it had on third world countries, specifically the liberation of former colonies, both in Latin America and the oceanic world, and also in Africa in particular. The aftermath of the Bandung Conference was that there was quite a lot of suspicion. In actual fact, the Secretary of State of the US, John Dulles, wrote a very scathing report about the so-called non-alignment. And he said it was not a position of neutrality, it was neo-communism. And therefore they decided to put together a program to reorientate global third world, so that it knows where the side on which the bread is buttered. And therefore followed numerous coups d'etats, which were engineered in Washington, D.C., including here in Brazil, as I've said, including in Indonesia, the same president who had hosted the Bandung Conference, and numerous in Africa. Now, what implication did this have? The implications it had was that neo-colonialism took effect immediately thereafter. The former colonies would continue to function and operate directly under the influence and directive that came from Washington. There are few, indeed, that continued to receive support from USSR, especially in East Asia, in Vietnam, in North Korea, Cambodia, and so on, but with limited global influence from the Communist Party. Now, what I thought I would also do was to play you this this very interesting. It's quite a recent one. I don't know if maybe Bruno would understand it. We can try it. It's a very recent one. Maybe Bruno will understand it because it's sung in French. But it comes from this gentleman in Côte d'Ivoire. He called himself Jah Fogoli. Very interesting song. And his narrative is that at the juncture in which we find ourselves, they have decided to do whatever they want to do with the world. So they make a pact among themselves and they say we're going to slice Africa as we want, and therefore the disruption that they invoke, dividing communities, families, villages, and splitting people along cultural and ethnic lines when they draw the borders, when they were slicing in 1885 in Berlin, and also the wars that are perpetuated now, whether they are fighting in Iraq. They make pact that I'll fight the Iraqis, I will get oil, but you will get to manage the Kurds. And so they make deals among themselves. So it's a game they play, and it's a very dangerous game for us in the global south. If you don't mind, we can just play a short version. Yes, we got it now. Countries in Africa are divided, and how they've divided and separated villages, ethnic groups, families, and the implications and the impact it has. But of course, the global imperial forces continue to be at play, and the spirit of Bandung should be invoked. We should invoke the spirit of Bandung in order to remind ourselves why we went to Bandung first and foremost, and whether or not that original ambition, original mission has been achieved, because we are way too far from achieving that particular mission that the leaders of the world had, the global south had in front of them. Now, let's try and fast forward. So around 2005 and then later 2009, BRICS formally came to be, and you look at the main or primary objectives for the establishment, you realize these are emerging powers from the global south, and they believe their voice is not amplified to talk on behalf of the global majority. And therefore, they should cover space for them, a voice for the global majority, so that they could properly be heard and contribute to the agenda on global affairs. Importantly, the political, in as far as the handling and management of the United Nations, Security Council matters, but also economic cooperation. Whether we're talking IMF or World Bank, and of course we can go back into history and talk about the challenges besieging third world countries out of the World Bank extended loans, including here in Brazil. There's very interesting literature on the effects of the World Bank loans. on the economy of Brazil, but mainly also in Africa. Numerous African countries, the IMF and World Bank had devastating consequences and implications for re-enslaving those economies such that they continue to be fodders for resources, resource demands from the global north. Now, in summary, the objectives of BRICS is, as we say, always in 3 pillars, the political and security cooperation, the economic and financial, the people-to-people cultural exchange. And if you were to go to those resolutions of Bandung, you will realize that everything falls almost in those particular big blocks, those 3 big blocks. So it means we have, in a way, revisited Bandung through BRICS. But the global fight, the fight in front of us is a totally different one. It's no longer independence of nation states, perhaps economic independence. There is a very interesting commentary from Vijay Prasad about what BRICS really stands for, and which, in his own definition, is economic cooperation, and that BRICS is not a political organization nor association at all. It is not even able to defend member states. If war was to be waged against either Russia or China, we don't have any pact at BRICS level similar to the NATO. So we would automatically either fold our arms or find other ways or mechanisms to support our allies without cautiously, without invoking the wrath of of NATO or the USA. So that's where we find ourselves currently, suggesting therefore that the original mission of Bandung has not been achieved. We are way too far from achieving that. We should equally also remember that in BRICS, we always talk about the reformation of the United Nations system. And this is foremost in our agenda. We say until such a time that the UN system is completely reformed, we would not be able to have a harmonious world order system where nation states feel that their sovereignty will never be violated and they are guaranteed the same rights as anybody, whether you are Palestine or you are Israeli. You can under the same umbrella, sit under the same umbrella and be beneficiaries of the same shade. So this is not where we are. We are not able to stand for the rights and interests of our own members. It means that BRICS, either by design or because it is perhaps at its infancy, it is not able to do what the European Union is able to do at this stage. There are, of course, nuances that are currently unfolding. If you were to look, for argument's sake, at the question of the tariffs and its implication recently, the US tariffs has sparked something quite interesting. And we saw in the past week that the foreign minister of China, for the first time, visited India. And the Indian Prime Minister is talking now about meeting Beijing and having their historic ties, historic alliances reimagined. So it implies that something is slowly but surely boiling. If we were to look, for argument's sake, at the question of, even though it's at a rhetorical level, by and large, new financing instruments between the BRICS countries, you will see that something is emerging. But I would want to believe that the global majority, the general public, somehow are impatient about lack of progress in as far as that is concerned. If you were to look at trade post the 2008 financial crisis, you will see that instead of the global south being the feeder of raw materials to the global north, trade among the global south countries has escalated considerably. So there are quite a lot of interesting trends that are emerging over the past 15, 20 years that are quite interesting, suggesting that the future of global world order is likely going to be completely different from that which we have been used to during the Cold War and over the last 2 decades plus. Now, one could safely say that in the early 1990s, and especially after the demolition of the Berlin Wall, unilateralism was a given. Everybody looked to Washington, D.C., and everybody had to do trade with Washington, D.C., of course, using the dollar denominator for your trade. But no one would ever have thought that there would come a time in the immediate future where China or any other nation would go toe-to-toe with the USA and respond with the same amount of vigor when necessary, whether it's sanctions, whether it's tariffs, whether it's, and we've reached that particular moment in time where the US power is slowly but surely diminishing. As they say in global affairs, no power remains perpetually. There was an era of the British Empire. There was an era of many other empires before it, and the era of the US hegemony power is slowly but surely fading away. What they had thought that they would be able to do specifically with Russia, maximum sanctions could not cripple the economy of the Russians. Instead, the Russian economy is growing at a rate unprecedented. So it means that that hegemonic power of the USA is waning down and is slowly slipping away, and it has given birth to the leadership that no one would have anticipated. The kind of leadership we get from the USA recently, no one would have predicted in the 70s, 80s that we could have a leadership of this caliber and character. In actual fact, I like very much the analysis given by Professor Weiwei from Sudan. He says, because of the US dominance and the arrogance over time, they came to a stage where capital has taken over. So it's no longer a normal democracy. It's a corporate state. run by big arms companies, pharmaceutical companies who are responsible for propping up some of these leaders. And therefore, the idea of democracy as the rule of the people by the people is no longer a concept that the Americans practice. Of course, in their books, in their constitution and everywhere, it's retained. But in practice, it has completely faded away. What does all of this mean? It means that into the near future, global affairs are going to be completely reshaped. We are in an era where we are reimagining global affairs. And what is likely going to emerge will be something quite imaginary, of course, but quite interesting. Something where countries of the global south are likely going to dictate the terms of reference for that future that we all aspire for. And by so doing, the likelihood is that we are going to resort to the terms of reference that we had given at Bandung Conference. Those recommendations, those conclusions, those declarations are likely, if the terms of reference are set from the global south, those terms of reference are likely going to borrow from the Bandung Conference declaration. Okay, let me stop. Thank you.